Right now, somewhere outside your window, there's a plant just sitting there. Maybe it's a tree, maybe a weed pushing through the crack in the pavement. It looks completely still. It doesn't make a sound. It doesn't appear to notice anything. Not the wind, not the insects crawling along its stem, not you. And for most of human history, that was the whole story. Plants were backdrop, scenery, the quiet, passive stage on which real life happened. But something has been quietly dismantling that assumption, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. For most of recorded history, the boundary between plants and animals felt obvious and absolute. Plants didn't move, they didn't react, they didn't respond. They were, by the common understanding, alive in only the most minimal sense. Growing, yes, but experiencing nothing. The ancient Greeks classified them as beings with a vegetative soul, capable of nutrition and reproduction, but nothing more. Medieval scholars agreed. Enlightenment scientists agreed. And for centuries, nobody pushed back very hard. Why would they? The plant just sat there. It gave no reason to look closer. Then biologists started looking closer. And what they found, quietly, incrementally, across decades of careful experiment, was something that didn't fit any of the old categories. Start with this. A caterpillar lands on the edge of a leaf and begins to chew. The sound is almost imperceptible, a tiny rhythmic tearing. The plant can't scream, it can't run, it can't even flinch. But within minutes, something begins happening deep in its tissue that you'd never see with the naked eye. The plant starts flooding the damaged area with bitter, toxic chemical compounds, making the leaf taste terrible, triggering defenses designed to stop the attack. Remarkable enough on its own. But then researchers noticed something stranger happening a few feet away. Neighboring plants, ones that hadn't been touched, were producing those same defensive chemicals before any caterpillar reached them, before there was any physical reason to respond at all. The signal had traveled. It moved through the air as volatile chemical compounds, an invisible, airborne message released by the plant under attack and absorbed through the leaf surfaces of every plant nearby. The neighbors didn't just receive it, they acted on it, they prepared. And if you watched it happen between two animals, you would not hesitate for a single second to call it communication. The information moved, the behavior changed. Whatever word you want to use for that process, it happened. Scientists are still arguing about what to call this. But here's what nobody disputes. The signals are real, the responses are real, and something is happening that our old categories simply can't contain. What made the public sit up straight was a different experiment, one involving a plant you may already know, Mimosa pudica, sometimes called the sensitive plant. Touch its leaves and they fold shut instantly, snapping closed like a slow exhale, a ripple traveling down the branch. It's startling the first time you see it. Defensive, deliberate looking. Researchers decided to test something specific. Could this plant learn? They dropped it from a small height, enough of a jolt to trigger that folding response. The plant closed. They dropped it again. It closed again, then again, and again, dozens of times. And here's where the experiment turns strange. Eventually, the plant stopped closing, not because the drops had stopped, but because the plant had, in some functional sense, decided they weren't a threat. The stimulus was familiar now, harmless, ignorable, so it ignored it. Then the researchers waited several weeks and dropped the plant again. The leaves snapped shut. The memory had not faded. In a plant with no brain, no nervous system, no neurons of any kind, an experience had been encoded and retained across time. Try to fit that into the old model of what a plant is. It doesn't fit. That memory is real. That much is not in dispute. What is still genuinely unknown is where it lives. There is no hippocampus, no neural network, no centralized structure where you could point and say, that is where the plant keeps what it has learned. What scientists can see is that the information appears to be distributed across the plant's cellular signaling networks, encoded in electrochemical gradients, in the states of proteins, in patterns of molecular activity spread across thousands of individual cells acting without any conductor. It is an architecture so different from a brain that comparing the two almost feels absurd. And yet the output, the retained response to past experience, looks from the outside like something we would recognize immediately in any animal. That gap between the mechanism and the result is exactly where the mystery lives, and nobody, as of right now, has fully crossed it. This question isn't new, it just went underground for a very long time. Charles Darwin, the same Darwin who rewrote our understanding of life itself, was quietly fascinated by carnivorous plants and climbing vines. He spent years watching the way certain plants moved, tracked, reached. He wrote an entire book about it. He suspected something was happening that science couldn't yet properly describe, but the tools didn't exist. The molecular biology that would eventually reveal chemical signals moving through plant tissue in real time didn't arrive until the late 20th century. And when it did, the question stopped being philosophical. It became experimental, testable, real. What Darwin suspected with his eyes, modern researchers began to confirm with instruments he never could have imagined. And what those instruments revealed is something far older and stranger than a nervous system. A plant that warns its neighbors is doing something with information. A plant that stops responding to a familiar drop and remembers that decision weeks later is doing something with experience. These are not metaphors. They are documented, repeatable, measurable events. They don't require us to believe plants are conscious. They don't require us to believe plants feel anything. But they do require us to admit that something is happening, something ordered, something responsive, something that tracks the world and adjusts to it, without any of the physical machinery we assumed was necessary for that to be possible. And that is where the deeper question lives. What if intelligence isn't something some species have, but a property that emerges wherever a system becomes complex enough to respond to its environment in non-random ways? Right now, that plant outside your window is still there. It looks the same as it did at the beginning of this. Still, quiet, unremarkable. But somewhere in its tissue, chemical signals are moving. It knows the direction of the light. It may be tracking what its neighbors are sensing. If something lands on its leaves, it will respond. If that something turns out to be harmless, it will remember. The whole time you've been watching it, it has been watching the world in the only way it knows how, with no eyes, no ears, no brain, and no silence at all. We called it furniture because it didn't move the way we moved. We called it unaware because it didn't signal the way we signal. We mistook the form for the absence of the thing. It was never still, never silent, never unaware. We were.